There was no clutch, there was no gearbox. There was not even a neutral, which meant there was no way to sit still with the engine running. If you stopped, the engine stopped with you. To move again, you had to start it all over. And the engine was not where you would expect to find it. It was not in the middle of the machine, low between the wheels, the way an engine has sat on almost every motorcycle ever built. It was inside the front wheel, 5 cylinders arranged in a star, bolted around the front axle, spinning around and around with the wheel as it rolled down the road. When the motorcycle moved, the whole engine turned with it, a blur of metal where the spokes should have been. By every rule of common sense, this should have been a joke, a curiosity for a trade show, a clever drawing that never survived contact with a real road. Instead, in the middle of the 1920s, a man took one of these machines to a racetrack outside Berlin, held it flat out at almost 90 miles an hour, and won a national championship on it. This is the story of the Megola. It is one of the strangest machines the motorcycle has ever produced, and for a few short years it was not a punchline, but a serious, fast, winning motorcycle. The strangeness is the easy part of the story. The harder part is the man behind it, a Munich engineer who had climbed up from the very bottom of the trade and who could look at the most settled idea in all of motorcycling, the place where the engine goes, and decide that everyone else had simply put it in the wrong spot. His name was Fritz Cockerell. He was born in Munich in the autumn of 1889, into a Germany that was inventing the engine almost as fast as it could imagine new uses for it. Cockerell did not arrive at motorcycles through wealth or a university chair. He arrived through the workshop floor. As a young man, he worked as a machinist at a plant that built airships, those enormous rigid balloons that were, at the time, the cutting edge of German engineering ambition. From there he moved to heavy industry, to steam turbines at the Maffei works, learning how power was made and tamed at the largest scale. And then he took a job that placed him, without knowing it, at the very birth of a legend. He became a test engineer at a small Munich firm called Rapp Motorenwerke, a maker of aircraft engines. Within a few years, that company would change its name and its emblem and become Bayerische Motorenwerke. It would become BMW. Cockerell was there in the years before the badge, in the greasy, experimental early days, learning aircraft engines from the inside. He was, in the truest sense, a self-made engineer. He held no professor's chair and carried no famous family name. What he had was a pair of hands that had actually built things, an eye trained on real metal rather than on paper theory, and the restless habit of a man who takes every machine he meets apart in his head to see how it might have been done better. Germany after the First World War was full of ruined ambition and hungry talent. Factories that had built weapons and engines now scrambling for anything to make. And into that churn stepped a machinist who had learned power from the biggest engines in the country and was ready to build something entirely his own. That last detail matters because it explains where the Megola came from. Cockerell had spent his formative years around the aircraft engine, and there was one type of aircraft engine, common in the First World War, that behaved unlike anything on the ground. It did not sit still and let its pistons pump up and down inside it. The entire engine spun, and a young engineer who understood that spinning motor was about to ask a question no one else was asking. To understand what Cockerell did, you first have to understand that engine. On almost every motor you have ever seen, the cylinders stay still, and the pistons move inside them. The block is bolted to the frame and does not go anywhere. But in the years around the First World War, many fighter aircraft used a different and stranger design, called the rotary engine. On those, the crankshaft was fixed in place and the entire bank of cylinders, the whole star of them, spun around it, whirling in a circle with the propeller bolted straight to the front. Pilots described the machine trying to twist itself sideways in the air from the sheer force of all that spinning metal. It was heavy, it was violent, and it put out a great deal of smooth, low turning power. That last quality is the one to hold on to because it is the whole secret of what came next. A rotary engine does not deliver its effort in a thin, screaming rush at the top of its range, the way a highly strung sports engine does. It leans on the road with a broad, even shove from very low speeds, the kind of pulling power an engineer calls torque. And torque delivered low and wide is exactly the thing that lets a machine get moving and keep moving without the elaborate ladder of gears that lets a peaky engine cheat its way up to speed. Cockerell had spent years listening to engines like that. He understood better than almost anyone that this kind of motor did not really need a gearbox at all. Now hold that picture in your mind, an engine that is itself a spinning wheel of cylinders, and set it down not in an airplane but on a road. That was Cockerell's leap. If the engine is already going to spin, he reasoned, why fight it? Why send its power through a chain, through gears, through a gearbox and a clutch and 100 moving parts, only to end up turning a wheel at the far end? Why not simply make the engine the wheel, bolt the star of cylinders around the front axle, let it spin, and let the road wheel it drives be the same wheel it lives inside? No chain, no gearbox, no clutch. The shortest possible line between the burning of fuel and the turning of a road. He drew the design in 1920. To build it, he needed money and partners, and he found two. A financier named Meixner raised the capital, reportedly with the help of a Swiss bank, and an engineer named Otto Landgraf handled the hard mechanical detail. The company took its name from the three of them, from Meixner, from Cockerell, which was Cockerell's German spelling, and from Landgraf, Megola, Megola. They set up in Munich, and in 1921 the first machines went on sale. To sit on a Megola for the first time was to feel the whole logic of a motorcycle turned inside out. There was no fuel tank in the usual place between your knees because the front wheel and its engine needed all the attention up front. Instead, the machine had a low, riveted body of pressed steel, a kind of shallow steel boat that you sat down into rather than astride, almost like an armchair, with a long set of handlebars reaching back to you. The main tank of fuel was hidden inside that steel body, and it fed a small reservoir up near the engine so the spinning motor could drink. The engine itself was a marvel of tight thinking. 5 cylinders arranged in that star, 4-stroke, with simple side valves. Each cylinder displaced 128 cubic centimeters for a total of just under 650. It produced about 14 horsepower. That does not sound like much, and on paper it is not. But it did not need to be much because of how it delivered that power. The cylinders spun around the axle at roughly 6 times the speed of the wheel, a built-in reduction of 6 to 1, and a rotary engine of this kind makes its power in a broad muscular sweep rather than a narrow high-strung peak. That combination meant the machine could pull cleanly from very low speeds all the way up to its top speed without ever changing gear. So Cockerell simply did not give it any gears to change. One ratio, fixed, straight to the wheel. And here the elegance of the idea began, very quietly, to show its teeth. Because if there is only one fixed ratio, bolted directly between the engine and the wheel, then there is no way to disconnect them. There is no clutch to pull in, no neutral to drop into. The engine and the front wheel are in effect one single object. When the wheel turns, the engine turns. When the wheel stops, the engine stops. You could not sit at a curb with the motor idling, the way every other rider in Germany could. On a Megola, standing still and running were simply not things that could happen at the same time. That one fact shaped everything about how you lived with the machine. To start it, you put the motorcycle up on a stand, so the front wheel was off the ground, and you spun that wheel by hand until the engine caught and roared into life, the whole star of cylinders blurring into a disc. Then you lifted it off the stand and rode away. If you had to stop in traffic, you faced a choice. You could kill the engine and go through the whole starting ritual again when the road cleared. Or if you were skilled and the space allowed, you could keep the machine crawling, riding slow, patient little circles in the road, never quite stopping, waiting for the way ahead to open. Riders of the Megola learned to hate a red light in a way no one else on 2 wheels ever had to. Picture it from the curb. A man sits low in his little steel boat of a motorcycle, the front wheel a solid, howling blur of 5 cylinders, and the traffic ahead of him stops. He cannot. So he peels away from the line, out into whatever open pavement he can find, and begins to wheel his machine around in slow, deliberate loops. Engine spinning, the whole strange contraption turning patient circles in the street, while ordinary riders sit at ease with their motors ticking over beside him. It was, in its way, a perfect little portrait of the whole machine. Brilliant, committed and quietly absurd, all at the same time. There was one more consequence, and it was not a small one. The front wheel of the Megola was full of engine. There was no room in it for anything else, and that included a brake. So the Megola had no front brake at all. All of its stopping was done at the back, where Cockerell fitted not one but 2 separate brakes on the rear wheel, trying to make up for the one he could not put on the front. A machine that could reach the speed of a fast car, stopping with its back wheel alone. For all of that, the thing worked. It genuinely worked. Cockerell built it in 2 flavors. The touring model had a sprung rear wheel and a softer seat, and would run to about 53 miles an hour, a little over 85 kilometers an hour, which was perfectly respectable transport for the 1920s. And then there was the sport model, stripped of the rear suspension, its engine tuned harder, and it was quick. Not quick for a novelty. Quick, full stop. It would reach nearly 90 miles an hour, about 140 kilometers an hour, at a time when most motorcycles a man could buy struggled to approach that. To prove the point, Megola went racing, and this is where the joke stopped being a joke. A rider named Tony Bauhofer took a sport Megola to the Avus, the long, fast circuit outside Berlin, and ran it at 142 kilometers an hour, close to 90 miles an hour, holding that engine spinning in the front wheel flat out down the straight. And in 1924, Bauhofer won the German road racing championship in the class for machines over 500 cubic centimeters on the Megola, beating conventional motorcycles from conventional factories with the strangest engine layout anyone had ever brought to a starting line. The machine you could not idle at a traffic light was a national champion. Think about what that actually meant on the day. The Avus was a temple of speed, 2 long straights of road running out and back with banked curves at the ends, the place where German manufacturers went to prove their machines were the fastest in the land. And here, among the ordinary motorcycles with their engines slung sensibly between the wheels, came a rider crouched in a steel tub, the entire front wheel of his machine a spinning disc of engine, and he did not merely keep up, he won. For a moment, the strangest idea in motorcycling was not being humoured, it was being beaten only by nobody. The men who had put their engines in the proper place had been shown the back of a machine that had put its engine somewhere no one else would dare. Around 2,000 of them were built in those few short years. For a design this radical, made in a country this broken, that was a real achievement. But the same qualities that made the Megola brilliant were quietly making it impossible, and the world around it was about to make everything worse. Start with the machine itself. It was, in daily use, exhausting. The business of stopping and starting, of circling at junctions, of hoisting it onto a stand to fire it up, wore on owners in a way a normal motorcycle never did. If you had a flat tire on the front, you were not changing a tube at the roadside. The wheel was an engine. Repairing it was a workshop job, an afternoon of work, because to get at the wheel you were, in effect, dismantling the motor. The steering was heavy, weighed down by all that spinning mass out front. And the whole radial engine, beautiful as it was expensive and complicated to build. 5 cylinders and their valves, where a rival could sell you a simple single. Every one of these was a direct consequence of the central idea. Put the engine in the wheel and you get a pure direct drive, but you also get no neutral, no front brake, heavy steering, and a wheel you cannot simply repair. None of it was a mistake exactly. Each was the honest price of the elegant thing Cockerell had done. Added together, they made a machine that dazzled you on a Sunday and defeated you on a Monday. And then Germany itself gave way beneath the whole enterprise. The Megola was born into the years of the great German inflation, the period in which the currency collapsed so completely that by 1923 prices were being rewritten by the hour and life savings turned to paper. At the peak of it, a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before the numbers grew again, and money was carried in baskets and burned in stoves because it was worth less than firewood. When that madness finally ended, the country did not simply recover. It passed into a hard, unstable few years in which money was scarce and cautious, and a small firm in Munich selling an expensive, complicated luxury toy had almost no ground left to stand on. The Megola had never been transport for the ordinary man. It was a marvel for someone with cash to spare and patience to burn, and Germany in the middle of the 1920s had precious few of either. A radical motorcycle for the well-off is exactly the kind of thing an economy stops buying first. By 1925, only 4 years after the first machine had gone on sale, it was over. The Megola was finished, and Fritz Cockerell's strange spinning dream was set down for good. And here the story could simply end, the way so many of these stories end, with a clever machine crushed between its own contradictions and a cruel decade. But the Megola did something most failures never manage. It refused to be forgotten. Of the roughly 2,000 built, only around 10 to 15 are believed to survive today, and those survivors are treasured out of all proportion to how many people ever really wanted one when they were new. One sits in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, in the city where Cockerell drew it. preserved as a monument to an idea that was never repeated. In 1998, when the Guggenheim in New York mounted its landmark exhibition on the motorcycle as an art form, a Megola was there behind glass, one of the shapes that told the story of what the machine could have been. The comedian and collector Jay Leno keeps a sport model among his collection and speaks of it with something close to awe, the way you might speak of a beautiful animal that has no business existing. And that is the strange gravity the Megola has held onto for a century. People who have spent their whole lives around motorcycles, who have seen every clever solution the machine has ever produced, still stop in front of this one. They kneel down to look into the front wheel, to see the little star of cylinders that is supposed to be somewhere else. And they shake their heads. It is not admired because it was sensible. It is admired precisely because it was not. And because for a few short years it was strange and fast and real, all at once. And when one of the few surviving machines comes up for sale, the numbers are startling. At a Bonham's auction in London in 2016, one changed hands for more than £82,000. Estimates for a fine original touring model have run well beyond £100,000. The thing the money is really paying for is not speed or comfort or sense. It is paying for the fact that no one ever did this again. The engine in the front wheel was a road that led nowhere, a beautiful dead end. There was one faint echo, a single streamlined machine built by two other German engineers in 1935 with a 3-cylinder engine in the front wheel. But it was a one-off, a curiosity of a curiosity, and it too went nowhere. The idea was simply too pure to live. Everyone who came after put the engine back in the middle, where the sense was, and left Cockerell alone with the wheel. As for the man, he did what men like him always do. He kept going. After the Megola collapsed, Fritz Cockerell did not stop inventing for a single decade of the rest of his life. He built 2-stroke engines with 4 and 8 cylinders for experimental cars and motorcycles. He worked on light machines and auxiliary engines. In his later years, he was chasing diesel engines for aircraft, turbines, and even the rotary engine that would one day carry Felix Wankel's name. He was still an inventor when he died in 1965, 75 years old. A Munich engineer who had spent a lifetime turning settled ideas over in his hands to see if they had been assembled wrong. There is a strange symmetry in the machine he is remembered for. The Megola put its heart in a place no one else would dare, out at the very front, and set it spinning so that it could never quite come to rest. Its engine could not stand still. Neither, it seems, could the man who built it. Everyone told him the engine belonged in the middle, quiet, sensible, out of the way. He put it in the wheel and made it dance, and for a few short years in the 1920s, on a fast circuit outside Berlin, the whole spinning, impossible idea was ahead of everyone else on the road. If you have made it this far into a story about a motorcycle almost no one has heard of, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for, and a like or a subscribe helps these forgotten machines find the people who would love them. Next time we leave the spinning wheel behind for another engineer who looked at the motorcycle and decided it was all wrong. An aircraft designer who despised motorcycles so completely that when he was ordered to build one, he refused and drew something else entirely, something the whole world would fall for.